This is part 2 of the lecture for chapter 4, and we're going to start off with natural selection and 3 different examples of how a group can change over time. As you kind of see with this bell-shaped curve, this could go either way, but the one they're kind of demonstrating here is that you have this original group with this kind of flat bell-shaped curve, and you have some type of pressure coming on, as they list here, some pressure on the extremes of that group. And what that'll do is it'll somewhat eliminate those groups, the ones that are on the fringe ends, the ones that aren't as well able to adapt on the outsides. And it kind of will push a population more to a safe central position where there may be a more moderate temperature, there may be more of a suitable food source available, a variety of different things as far as their habitat goes that pushes the group to the middle. Another one, which would be a directional change, and the classic example of this one, which is typically listed in books as far as evolution goes, is the spotted moth or speckled moth in Great Britain, where in the 1800s you had a high amount of pollution, coal factories and such that were turning a lot of surfaces from a lighter color to a darker color, and the white moths weren't able to stay in that area, or at least weren't able to hide from predators as well. So the speckled or darker colored moths were better able to compete, and those are the ones that became more evident or more populated later on. The last type of selection would be disruptive, in which some type of an external force or something going on in the environment will have an effect on the central part of the group. So something that's the population really, works to the center of the group, whether it's their habitat, something divides the group, a food source is no longer available, there's a temperature change, water level changes, there could be a variety of things that changes the system, and something that is, again, more populated or more needed for the group is no longer available. And that'll kind of, as you can see, create a wedge in the group, in the population. And over a long period of time, this is something that can turn one species into two distinct species that can no longer mate and produce offspring. So just looking at some of the changes that we've had over a long period of time is, the continental movement going back from 225 million years ago from what we think to what we have today with the continents, the continental shift. And this could be the best example of a change we have here is the isolation of Australia and some of the surrounding islands with the marsupials. They are very different than all of the other animals that we seem to find, whether it's in Africa or Asia, North and South America. They all have slightly different arrangements with their mammals as compared to the marsupials. So just kind of showing how when a species is separated from the group, they can evolve and find different items that will make them unique. And that's what we just discussed. So this is just a slide that kind of shows some changes, or another change that has happened over many, many years, in this case 18,000 years, when we had some of the ice ages, and the last ice age somewhere ends about there. And you can see as far as continental ice, there's quite a difference as far as what we used to have to what we have today. You still have this ice or sea ice, which is up in the Arctic Circle. But as far as ice sitting on the land, there's not quite as much as there was once upon a time, 18,000 years ago. So that has changed quite a bit. So other things that can change the environment or change species, whether it's just eliminating some of the weaker ones or in a large scale, more uniform, removing many. And this is some of the things that we've seen historically that have wiped out many, many species and changed the dynamics of populations. We could have volcanoes, asteroids. I don't know why I put those backwards, but I did. You could have asteroids coming in, and that is the theory that we have with the dinosaurs. There was some asteroid that came in and hit the Earth, and over many, many, many years, slowly spelled out the demise of the dinosaurs and many other species that were around that time, about 65 million years ago. This little graphic here I kind of like, and it kind of explains the difference between richness and evenness. So we have the United States here as a comparison, and they just mention historically, and I would imagine when we say historic, we're saying pretty much before humans really had as much influence as they have today. And I find it very interesting to say, for example, like, okay, number of species, so 14 being higher than, of course, 0. So we're looking for areas that have a lot of red or, yellows. And we see some of those on the historic, and of course they're lessened in this current state. And you can see the amount of green that has increased. So that's probably the most interesting part. Or even the areas in white, which supposedly indicate that there's no species. I would really just imagine that just means less. And if for some odd reason we're really in a hot spot of that, I don't really know why, as far as lost species goes. But in any case, it does show that humans have had quite an effect on the amount of species. Going back to richness, what richness implies is it's just the number. So if you look at a forest, how many trees are in the forest? If there's 2 different types of trees, well, that's not very rich. If there's 50 different types of trees, that's quite a bit, then that shows that it's a very rich species forest. But it may be very poor in its evenness. So if I use that example of 50, and I have a lot of singles of these trees, but a vast majority of the trees in the forest are pines or maples, then it's not very evenly split. You need a good representation of many trees to show that it is a diverse forest. Okay, niches. Niches is kind of, I always think of it as a species job, what it does in the environment. Probably not the best explanation, it always kind of worked for me, but it just kind of shows, as far as a species goes, where does it live, what does it do in a particular location, what does it eat, where does it hang out, what is its range. Well, it's fundamental maybe in a certain area, but its realized could be quite less than what you actually have available to it. And that could be a lot of pressures that are in the particular area. So this is a really good example that we have here in Michigan and a lot of places, is owls and hawks. They both live in Michigan, southeast Michigan, and they both kind of eat the same things. They eat small mammals, small reptiles, whatever they can kind of get as far as small prey. But what's the main difference between owls and hawks? Owls tend to eat at night, and hawks tend to eat during the day. So they avoid direct competition by eating at different times of the day. I always like to think that the owls must have lost that bet because they were pressured into hunting at night. But I guess you really can't think that way because maybe they have better opportunities at night, less suspecting prey. They can use their senses to their advantage. I don't know. But that is one way to avoid direct competition. This is another interesting one in regards to warblers. We don't typically hear this when we talk about birds, but especially in the spring, we get a lot of warblers that come through Michigan. We'll try to at least talk about them, maybe see if you at least get their bird calls down in the spring. But warblers, or a variety of other animals, can avoid direct competition by eating at different locations. So we have these 5 different warblers that may live in the same tree or different types of similar trees, but they live in different parts so they can avoid direct competition. So they may live or eat insects or different parts of the tree to avoid direct competition with each other. So I find that kind of interesting as well. All right, we went over this in that quadrant lab, but just to mention it again, there's different ways that species can kind of disperse themselves. And the first one would be clumped, and this is when you see those videos of the buffalo running across the prairie, or in this case the wildebeest going across the river. They tend to all herd because there's safety in the numbers, because they are many times being hunted by some other predator in the location. So there's safety in being close to the herd. The next one would just be random, which is typically how we find trees in a forest, or in this case, this example, seeds from a dandelion. They just kind of fall where they may, so you don't know where you're going to find them. And the last one would be uniform. We talked about different types of trees that may separate each other based upon some type of pheromone they could put out, which would prevent similar trees from growing. But this example here, as far as lions, they typically will spread themselves out and they have their range in which they can hunt, and they will somewhat respect each other and maintain their own range. Or in other words, they can only guard so much area. And I think this is a good place to take a break, and we will stop for the end of lecture 2.